The Principal Cause of Death. Author Mark Richard Zubero. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. For Michael in learning the meaning of friendship. Acknowledgements. For their invaluable assistance, I wish to thank Mike Kushner, Peg Panzer, Rick Paul, and Kathy Pekasarid. Chapter 8. Scott glared at me. Starting the truck, he turned the key almost hard enough to snap it in two. The tires screeched as we pulled away from Denise Flowers' condo. He didn't speak until 5 miles later, when we were on Interstate 57. "That is one of the dumber things you've ever suggested," he said. Several miles of expressway passed by before the ultimate and witty repartee occurred to me. I said, "Is not? Dan Bluefield is not your best friend. The father is a sworn enemy, and the mother isn't going to invite you over for tea anytime soon. Why the hell would you want to go over there?" "I think the Bluefield family is the key to this murder," I said. "I don't. I think it is foolish and perhaps dangerous for you to go anywhere near anybody in that family." At that moment, I wasn't going near them. Scott was headed home. Other than jumping out of the car while it sped toward Chicago at over 60 miles an hour, I didn't have a lot of options. We worked out in silence at his place. My arm felt good enough for me to spend an extra half hour working out my frustration on the rowing machine. Later, I found Scott upstairs reading the Sunday paper. We get 2 sets of the Chicago Tribune and Chicago Sun-Times. We each read a separate one. I hate it when somebody else reads the paper before I do. We tried various compromises early in our relationship. At first, Scott offered to wait until I was finished reading the papers, but eventually I'd find half the section strewn across the living room floor on a Sunday morning. Finally, he got us separate subscriptions as a first anniversary present. That night, we managed to be civil to each other long enough to order a pizza and eat it. After supper, Scott retired to his den to go over the itinerary for a West Coast speaking tour he had scheduled for early November. I sulked in the library reading The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I have a weakness for science fantasy books when upset, and Jordan's opus was one of the best I'd run across in a long while. At 9, the phone rang. I didn't hear Scott stirring, so I answered. Daniel said, "It was murder." That conclusion was tentative, but Daniel said Longfellow had probably drunk himself into a stupor. Anyone could have come up on him. The man was heavy-set and probably a deep sleeper. It would be fairly simple and quick for someone to smother him. Scott appeared at the library door and looked questioningly at me. I said to Daniels, "Any idea how long he was dead before we found him?" "We don't know. What time he started drinking, it's going to be hard to tell from the contents of the stomach. I think my guess is he could have been dead almost any time after he got there. We've got the preacher from the congregation who talked to him about 9. He says Longfellow didn't seem intoxicated. Nobody saw Longfellow after that." "Not much help," I said. We talked a few minutes longer. Then, when I hung up, Scott came and sat next to me on the brown leather couch. He fingered the globe on the table next to the couch. He said, "It's been an emotional week." "Yeah," I said. "You know how I get when the season ends." He hadn't had time to go through his end-of-season depression. We've talked about why he goes through it, missing his buddies who scatter around the country, desire for the excitement of being in front of the crowds, enjoyment of a solid baseball career, postseason workouts, and being on the talk circuit didn't make up for the rush of throwing a fastball over 90 miles an hour. "You haven't had much time to adjust," I said. He looked at me. "No," he shrugged. "I'm worried about you. I probably shouldn't have come across so strong this afternoon." Suggesting going to the Bluefields was one of my dumber ideas. I said, "I'm sorry. I haven't been more attentive to you." He does need a lot of attention the week or so after the season. His relaxation time culminates when we go up to the cabin in Wisconsin. We hardly say 2 words to each other the whole time. Just spend the 3 days tramping miles and miles in the woods and along Lake Superior. After the season, he's pretty tired and vulnerable, a little like an alcoholic coming down from a 6-month drunk. And this year he hadn't had time to crash because of my problems. I said, "Next weekend we'll be up at the cabin. I'll make it up to you." He reached over, pulled me close, and kissed me. I enjoyed his warmth and his after-shower smell. I dropped my hand to the button on his jeans and undid it. Several hours later, we ate cold pizza in the breakfast nook, overlooking Lake Michigan and Lakeshore Drive. I take pride in the fact that I'm the one who taught him to enjoy cold pizza, although he still balks at chowing down on it for breakfast. Sometimes it takes so long to train a husband. I told him what Daniels had said. 2 murders, Scott said. Longfellow had to die because of something he knew. About the first one? We need to find out about his personal life, I said. Maybe he was secretly a spy for the government and foreign agents finally tracked him down. Scott raised an eyebrow at me. He was some foreign country's secret weapon to destroy the fabric of society with incompetence. I know. He was part of the first wave of alien invaders, destroying society by never fixing anything. I am only a little amused, I said. And Queen Victoria would be proud, he said. I chased him around the house, almost caught him in one of the guest bedrooms and managed to trip him in the living room an inch short of the floor-to-ceiling windows. By this time we were giggling almost uncontrollably, and then we stopped laughing as he pulled me close in a fierce embrace. The next morning, as I swung open my classroom door, a flashing fist whizzed toward my head. I reacted quickly enough to deflect the main impact, but my shoulder took a nasty punch. I rocked back, assumed another punch was coming, and ducked, then dove forward. My head bashed into a lean midsection. At first, I guessed it was Dan Bluefield's. I heard the breath whoosh out of my opponent. As my charge bashed him against the wall, I backed up. Bluefield Sr., clutching a spot 6 inches above his crotch, slowly sank to the floor. I found I still had my briefcase in my hand. I dropped it on a nearby desk, then turned to examine Bluefield. Other than some ragged gas for air, he looked hardly the worse for wear. When he got his breath back, he tried kicking out at me and scrambling to his feet. At the same time, a monumentally stupid person would have known he'd try something, not being monumentally stupid. I sidestepped, twisted around, feinted to my left, caught my balance, and brought my foot up into his crotch. Another round to Mason. "What can I do for you, Mr. Bluefield?" I asked. He grasped his nuts and moaned. "Did you come to confess to killing Jones and Longfellow? Longfellow saw you sneaking around the night of the murder." "He could have turned you in, of course." "How would you know he knew?" I said this last part more to myself. "Who's Longfellow?" Bluefield asked. "Old custodian around here." His lack of knowledge seemed genuine. "Think you're a smart guy, don't you?" he gasped. "I'm not the one in this room with the bruised balls," I said. "You ruined me," he said. "The pain will go away. I'm sure you'll be able to orgasm again soon. Maybe father a few more darlings like Dan Boy." "The drugs, you stupid shit. My supplier cut me off. He won't pay any of my legal fees." "I'm heartbroken." Bluefield eased himself into a chair. I kept my distance so I'd have plenty of time to ward off any surprise attacks. "You're going to be sorry you ever messed with me or my kid." "I've heard that tune. But if your supplier abandoned you, who posted your bail?" "I've got a few other connections." "Why is Dan such a mess?" I asked. "He's not a mess. I checked the records, arrested for the first time at 11, in 3 different chemical rehab programs before the age of 15. Almost 19 years old, and he barely qualified to be a senior this year. And I suspect that came about because Donna Dalrymple pulled a few strings." Bluefield snorted. "My kid told me he was pulling her string. I'm proud of him. I made it with a couple of my teachers when I was in high school." I noted his build and physique, tried to imagine him as a teenager. I guessed he was in his mid to late 30s. He would have been in his late teens when he fathered Dan. Would have had Dan's stringy masculinity. The face probably wouldn't have had as many nicks and scars. Then, results, I assumed, of choosing to fight instead of negotiate his way out of difficulties. "Did you know Mr. Jones was keeping a file on you and your kid?" He looked confused. "Why should I care about some file some wimp principal kept? Makes no difference to me. He's dead. Anyway." "Why are you here?" I asked. "I came to beat the shit out of a fucking faggot." "That makes no sense," I said. "With all the school personnel around, you couldn't hope to get away with it." He gave me a blank look. I could see Dan had inherited his dad's brains, and the old man didn't have that many to spare in the first place. "Mr. Bluefield, why don't you get the fuck out of my life? If you let your kid alone, he might have a chance at a decent life." That was Scott Carpenter with you on Saturday, he said. I decided to flow with his change of topic by giving him a yes. He's a faggot like you, I said. You don't get to say faggot anymore in my presence. I'll beat the shit out of you next time and any other time you say it. He stood up. I'm going to call all the newspapers and tell them Scott Carpenter diddles with guys. I said, they already know. He looked confused. Do you really think people you've worked with for a while don't guess when someone's gay? Do you think reporters who covered the team for years haven't figured it out? This closet shit is getting pretty old. You're way behind the times. You're lying, Bluefield snarled. I sighed. Kids are going to be coming in here in a few minutes. You have anything sane to say to me, or are you going to blow stupidity out of your ass until I die of boredom? He looked resentful and rebellious at this, but for the moment he refrained from an outright attack. When did you get out on bail? I asked. Why? Just want to know if you got out in time to have killed Marshal Longfellow. I never got near the old guy. I got out of jail and spent the day in the city trying all my contacts. I lost a lot of my stock because of you, and I need to be staked again. You cost me a bundle of money. I may have to move out of town. I came to beat the money out of you or your pretty boyfriend. Get real. I have no fear of you or anything you could possibly do. I guess he objected to my arrogance because he bellowed with rage and launched himself at me. I stepped aside and he flew past me, tripped, and landed against a corner of my desk. His face rammed into the edge of it at almost full tilt. He staggered to the floor, clutching the desk, attempting to keep himself upright. I saw a few drops of blood seep from a cut just over his eye. I watched him put his other hand out toward the chalkboard, steady himself, then lurch or stumble toward the doorway. I'll be back to make you pay, faggot, was his parting shot. I took a step in his direction. He nearly tripped on his own feet as he retreated out the door. After a surprisingly ordinary run of morning classes, I hunted up Meg at lunch and told her about Bluefield's visit. Her comments about the elder male idiot in the Bluefield clan were not positive. I sketched out for her a plan I had for dealing with Donna Dalrymple. Meg would go with me to confront the school psychiatrist and act as a buffer. She readily agreed. On the way to Donna's office, Meg asked me how I was handling the pressure of teaching, losing my house, being involved in a murder, and dealing with the Bluefields. I told her the kids in class were okay, and that Scott generally managed to keep me on an even keel. We found Donna Dalrymple at her desk in her office, munching on cookies and sipping a Diet Coke. A Mrs. Fields bag open on the desk attested to her excellent choice in cookie companies. Somebody who eats white chocolate chip cookies for lunch can't be all bad. She eyed Meg warily as we entered the room, then spotted me and jumped to her feet. I won't stay in the same room with that man, she said. I'll call the superintendent. Get out. Meg said, Donna, you're out of control. You used to be able to handle yourself. Do you really want to be a sniveling woman who loses her senses of self just because she's under an emotional strain? I've seen how you've worked all those years. I know you're not that kind. We've talked. We used to be good friends. I can't talk with him here. Want me to leave? I asked. Meg nodded. I went to call Scott to see if he'd had any luck with the Paradise Agency for young actors and actresses, the talent agency whose name I'd found in Jones's files. He told me he'd visited them just after they opened up at 9. They had an office on South Michigan Avenue, just a half block north of the old Lexington Hotel, where Geraldo Rivera hadn't found anything in Al Capone's vault. You wouldn't believe the building, Scott said. It was a 2-story brick affair, built maybe around 1910. I walked in and saw rats glare at me as if I were the one who needed to be exterminated. They didn't seem to be worried about my harming them. These were industrial-strength critters. Did you get to the agency? I asked. Sometimes his stories unravel slowly enough to drive me nuts. He took me up the befouled stairs through a door with cracked glass to a cubicle too filthy even for the rats to live in the middle of a mound of dirt and grime that might once have been a desk with papers on it, sat a handsome man in an impeccable suit. The guy was gorgeous, my lover said. The suit was cut perfectly. How nice for him, and the suit, I said. Scott ignored my sarcasm. His name was Blaine Farnsworth. He recognized me right away. He told me not to be put off by the office. They'd lost their lease on the last place, and the new one wasn't ready. He tried to sign me up as a client. I declined. Scott had asked the guy about Max Younger Farnsworth. Claimed he never heard of a Max Younger. checked some files and said the name wasn't listed. I think he was lying. Scott finished. Any way you can check him and his agency out? Way ahead of you. I called my agent. Scott's agent, Beauregard Vincent Strong, was headquartered in Los Angeles. I'd never met him. Scott generally described him as an acceptable weasel. I woke him up at home. He promised to check and get back to me later this afternoon. I told him about the Bluefield visit and promised to meet him in the city as soon as I was done talking to people at school. I didn't have time to find out what Megan learned from her talk with Dalrymple. Because the bell rang for afternoon class, I spent 2 impatient periods waiting. When the bell rang for my planning hour, I hurried to the library and asked what had happened. Meg said we needed to talk to Donna together. Just before we entered the room, Meg said, Donna and I used to be good friends, but we drifted apart. We talked this noon about many things. We found Donna expecting us in our office. She looked puffy-eyed. I leaned my shoulder against the door. Meg propped herself against the wall on my right. Dalrymple sat on my left. While Meg talked, Donna stared at her hands, which were clutched together in front of her on the desktop. Meg spoke briefly about the need for solving the murder, about not wanting to threaten Donna, and about how I was a person who could be trusted. When she finished, Donna gave a tremendous sigh and looked up at me. She explained how her relationship with Dan grew over time. The heart of her remembrance came when she said, Dan has a lot of hate in him. It's directed toward his father, and a lot of Dan's acting out is trying to compensate, to work out his feelings. At any rate, the father is the root cause of a lot of Dan's problems. We finally had a significant breakthrough the first week of school this year. She'd started working with Dan all of last term. They talked 3 or 4 times a week. He'd started out hostile and uncommunicative. That started to change after he had to spend 2 months at a work release program instead of going to jail for 2 months this summer for stealing some kid's motorcycle. It was a big misunderstanding. The kid told him he could borrow it, but Dan has an awful reputation around the courthouse, and he got a nasty judge. While he was on a work detail on a remote country road, the 3 crew members with him had almost succeeded in raping him. He'd managed to run away, dressed in only his socks and t-shirts. The experience hit him hard. I was a little surprised when he opened up about it. He's not gay? Meg asked. No, but I think the attempted rape contributed a lot to his hatred for you, Mr. Mason. I didn't make the connection until I talked to Meg today. I suppose I should have earlier, especially after our talk last week. Donna shrugged. I was more concerned about him opening up to me, and he did. He certainly couldn't open up to anyone at home about the incident, and I doubt he could trust any of his friends. He could lose status if that kind of thing got out. He cried for nearly half an hour, and what he kept saying was, I hate him. At first I thought he meant one of his attackers, but it was his dad. Over the next few weeks, as Dalrymple and Bluefield talked, they became closer. I don't know how it happened. I know it was my fault because I'm the adult. The kid was 18, Meg said. That's why Jones didn't fire me outright, Donna said. But it was unprofessional of me. I shouldn't have, and I shouldn't have done anything at school. It was stupid. The deals of how the affair got started weren't terribly important, so I didn't ask. I didn't kill Jones, she said. I met with him that day and agreed to a plan for me to leave honorably. I told Dan that day that I wouldn't be able to see him anymore. Dan was furious. I'm sure that's why he attacked the student teacher. And you. I was stupid to cut off the relationship, but I didn't see any other way out. When he came back from the doctor after your fight, he came to see me. I felt such guilt I held him and comforted him. You didn't? Meg asked. No, Dalrymple sounded totally miserable. My husband doesn't know about any of this. I want to protect him and the children. I'm leaving the state. I'm going to practice somewhere else. It'll probably mean I have to tell my husband the truth. He'll demand a divorce. Not that that would be a shock. Dan was more satisfying in this room than my husband was in the 10 years we were married. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. I wrote to this place the first time I got caught with Dan. I got the answer the day before the murder. She showed us an acceptance of her application at a clinic in Denver. They took me quickly because the professor I did my residency with at Northern Illinois University is the head of the program. He's often asked me to come out to join his staff. I had no reason to kill Jones. I was out of it. We left her. Minutes later in the hallway, Meg said, Poor thing. I feel sorry for her. After school, I found Max Younger ordering kids about the auditorium. I jumped onto the stage to talk to him. He told me he had a show to do, and he could give me 5 minutes between rehearsals of Acts 2 and 3 about 4 o'clock. I grabbed his arm and whispered in his ear, "Paradise Agency for young actors and actresses." He turned red, barked a few orders to the assembled kids, and beckoned me off the stage. We sat in the last row of the auditorium. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. "I know the name of the agency and that you were connected with it. I know Jones was investigating. I know there was something shady about the operation." This last was a bit of a lie. "I want to know what was so shady exactly and how Jones found out about it." He chose to call my bluff. "Jones didn't know shit, neither do you." I said, "I think there's something to know. Something that you could get in big trouble for. Something big enough for you to want to kill Jones." He jumped to his feet and leaned toward me, shaking a finger in my face. "I have done nothing wrong. Nothing anybody can prove is wrong, so... but out of my life." He stomped back to the stage. Seeing it was useless to pursue the topic, I left. I returned to the city. Scott met me in the entranceway of his apartment. "I just got a call from my agent. The Paradise Agency has a nasty reputation." Beauregard had told him about rumors that Paradise hired young actors and actresses to perform overseas, mostly in Italy and Japan, but other places as well. "Some people talk about kids never coming back." I thought white slavery was a thing of the past, I said. Beauregard couldn't give me any confirmation of the rumors. He didn't remember where he heard them. Paradise has branches in New York, L.A., and Atlanta. I described the place here to him. Beauregard seemed to think they were all probably like that. "Let's pay them another visit," I said. If anything, Scott had understated the filth and degradation of the building and the surroundings. We paused in the alley next door to reconnoiter. I never wanted to explore the alley depths. This was urban nightmare number one, first class and done right. Scott was right about the enormous rats. Blaine Farnsworth had a nameplate on his desk. He saw Scott, stood up, and held out his hand. "You changed your mind. You came back to sign up?" Scott was right. The suit fit him beautifully. The guy was a hunk. Scott shook Farnsworth's hands and introduced me. I got a puzzled look and a handshake. I glanced around the room. It was the kind of office that Miss Havisham would have felt at home in. Scott and I had decided on a strategy on the way out. "We'd start nice," Scott said. "I thought about your offer, and I decided I wanted to know what you could do for me." Farnsworth gave us a glowing picture of what he could do, then said, "With you as a client, we'd be able to move right up." We sat in unmatched kitchen chairs that had been patched with duct tape. Scott asked about the agency's current list of clients. Farnsworth reeled off a list of unfamiliar names and bookings in places I'd never heard of. I told him that. Farnsworth said, "I don't quite understand your presence here." He sounded puzzled and suave, but I thought I detected irritation and suspicion just below the surface. Scott said, "He's my lover, and we want to know how you would handle our relationship as a coming out thing in the papers. We're thinking of getting married on Johnny Carson." "Like Tiny Tim did?" Farnsworth asked. Tiny Tim was a star briefly in the late 60s. He played ukulele and sang songs in a grating falsetto. He got married to a Miss Vicky on the Carson show, which, that night, drew one of the highest ratings in its history. Scott said, "I'm sure it would draw a lot of viewers. Could really put this agency on the map." I could almost see little dollar signs rolling in Farnsworth's eye. "They'd stop and hit the jackpot in a second," he said. "You're really gay. You guys look so masculine. Are you putting me on?" Scott leaned over and kissed me on the lips. The guy said, "Wow, Scott Carpenter in my office kissing a guy. Wow." He shook his head. "Can you handle the bookings and publicity?" Scott asked. "I guess. Sure, definitely." He gained momentum with each utterance. He began to outline plans for press conferences, speaking engagements, national, international tours. "One thing," Scott said. "Anything," Farnsworth said. "We need some information," Scott said. Farnsworth looked weary. "I told you this morning that I didn't know the guy you asked about." Scott said, "You don't tell us. You don't get the contract." Farnsworth looked turned from weary to definitely suspicious. His handsome face bent into frown lines. "This is a put-on. To get information, you don't need a dinky little operation like this. You've got big-time agencies behind you. What the hell is this? And don't give me into this 'I'm sorry for a small agency and want to give it a chance.'" I couldn't think of any arguments to allay his suspicions. Judging from Scott's silence, neither could he. Farnsworth rummaged in his desk and pulled out a gleaming gun. He said, "I want answers from you two before I throw you out." I checked the distance to the door and wondered whether it would be possible to create a diversion or whether a frontal attack was feasible. Farnsworth caught my eye. Don't even think about it. No matter what noise you make, help won't come. Nobody in this neighborhood cares. And if they do, they know enough not to ask questions. You wouldn't murder Scott Carpenter, I said. Gave me a nasty grin. Wouldn't I? I want some answers. He demanded to know what we really wanted. Scott repeated what he'd said this morning. Farnsworth said, You keep mentioning this younger guy. I told you I never heard of him. I want you to leave. He waved the gun at us. We got up and edged toward the exit. Don't come back, he warned. We slipped out the door in the street. Scott said, Cute. Can cover a multitude of sins, but I'd never trust him. Let's wait for him to come out, I said. For what? If we follow him, he'll probably just go home like most of the other commuters in the city. I'd like to look around his office without the benefit of his assistance, I said. Now look, Scott began. Quickly I pulled him into the alley. Farnsworth was at the door to his building. His tie was loosened and he carried a paperback book with him. In the filth-infested alley we debated. Scott didn't want to go in and had several excellent reasons why we shouldn't. It's illegal. We have no proof. He's done anything wrong. We could get caught. I had no answer to his argument, so I marched out of the alley and back to the building entrance. I walked up the stairs. Scott was behind me, muttering and cursing. His most frequent comment was, This is the dumbest thing we've ever done together. I heard occasional noises from a few of the other cubicles in the building. On the second floor, no light shone from inside the Paradise Agency. Breaking in was simple. I gave the door an angry shove, and it burst open. I managed to catch it before it slammed into the wall. We rummaged around the grime and filth for half an hour. It wasn't 5 yet, and the window faced west across Michigan Avenue, so we didn't have to turn the light on. Scott whispered, Let's get the hell out of here, an exasperatingly high number of times. Just after I said, Would you shut up? We heard footsteps coming toward the door. He growled and I murmured, Hush! The footsteps stopped outside the door. I'd closed and tried to relock it. Whoever it was used the same method I did to enter, a sharp shove on the door and a grab before it banged into the wall. Behind it, Max Younger stood in the doorway with a McDonald's bag in one hand and an astonished look on his face. We gazed at each other for a moment. He glanced at Scott. You're somebody, Max said to him. I said, What the hell are you doing here? Max trudged into the room, flipped on the desk lamp, dropped his bag of burgers onto the desk, and flopped into the chair. I said, I want answers now, Max. What the hell is this operation? Max decided on exasperation as a major part of his response. He said, It's a second job. What the hell does it look like? If I ever want to pay back what I owe the district, I have to get it somewhere. I moonlight here. Farnsworth called me earlier today and told me you'd been around. I didn't know you'd try to break in. I should call the cops. I bet they'd love to look at your files, Scott said. They wouldn't find anything, Max said. We haven't made a dime in 6 months. We had to move from our last place. We can barely pay the rent on this flea bag office. If it doesn't make any money, how will that help you pay what you owe? I asked. We're expecting a couple of things to break for us real soon. He ignored the skeptical look on my face. Then what did Jones find? I asked. Max sighed. He found rumors. He'd read some article in some tabloid talking about phony agencies. He believed them, I suppose. I didn't help much by telling him it was none of his business. I guess he got suspicious, but there wasn't anything for him to find, because there's nothing here. Sure, we get kids' bookings overseas, but they're all legit, and all the kids come back. Mind if we check? I asked. Max hesitated, then said, Hell, I don't care. Do what you want. You won't find anything. I didn't think we would. They probably wouldn't keep records like teenagers sold into slavery $100. See Omar, the tent maker in Astrakhan. Where else do you keep files? I asked. Hidden around the city in locked luggage containers at the train stations and bus depots, Max said. We move them every 24 hours. Good luck finding them all. I didn't appreciate his sarcasm, but I guess we didn't have much choice. We weren't prepared to search the city. Certainly he wasn't prepared to give us any more information. Didn't work, I murmured as I started the truck. What we need to do is have one of those murder mystery scenes, Scott said. You know, where they gather all the suspects together. We explain how it logically has to be one of them, and then one of the others dramatically stands up and confesses to having been the murderer. I swung east onto Balboa Drive to get to Lakeshore Drive. Scott continued. We could find some way to trick them into confessing. Maybe you've hit on the right approach, I said. I was making a joke, Scott said. He glared at me. I can already tell I'm not going to like this. Yes, you will. I outlined my plan as we cruised up Lakeshore Drive. It was simplicity itself. We would tell all the suspects that we knew that Jones had had more files hidden somewhere in the office and that we were assembling a detail to take the place apart to find them the next evening after school. I said, Jones had to have something on the murderer that we haven't uncovered. The murderer will have to come to find and destroy it sometime tomorrow after school. Scott's objections began with, won't they get suspicious? How do you know there really is something? Won't they be afraid of being caught? How are we going to get the school to cooperate? And went on beyond. He even threw in, let's just call the cops. A couple of times. The man has no imagination or too much. He alternated between realistic roadblocks and fanciful fears. At home, I called Meg. She was more than willing to join in the conspiracy. In fact, she offered to help make sure each of the suspects knew about the supposed search. About being caught setting the trap, I said, I have a right to be in the school, and I don't feel guilty about trying to trap a murderer. I've been a suspect far too long. To Scott's objection that there might be nothing to be found, I said, these people all had guilty secrets. Who knows what else Jones might have found out? My bet is they'll all assume the worst, or at least the killer will. They'll panic easily. Scott again urged calling the police. They don't even know about these people, I said. Which brings up another point, he said. He wrangled on the police issue. Finally, I said, Frank's on vacation. Those other two cops haven't been sympathetic. They aren't interested in getting me off the hook. Only we are. We've got to do everything we can. If Daniels and Johnson go talk to those people, they'll just deny anything they said to us. I think we have to give this a try. Next day at noon, Meg and I compared notes. We knew for certain that all our suspects had heard the news. When Scott showed up at 4, the three of us discussed details. He still had lots of objections, but with both Meg and me against him, he soon gave up. The murderer couldn't try anything until after the office closed at 5. We'd taken Georgette into our confidence. She made sure someone was in the office at all times to prevent the murderer from looking around during the day. She also arranged it so that the custodians would be in the new section all afternoon and night working on tasks far from the office. I figured the murderer would try earlier than later. We'd announced the new inspection wouldn't happen until tomorrow. Plus, the earlier whoever it was showed up, the less likely his or her appearance would draw attention. The last rays of golden sunlight peeked through the nooks and crannies as we moved into position like the people we expected after us. We avoided the night custodians. It wasn't hard. We heard them in the news section with a radio blaring and vacuum cleaners distantly humming. As we moved toward our objective, the noise slowly faded. We took our position in the washroom directly across the hall from the main office. I climbed onto one of the toilets and carefully removed a ceiling tile. Now we could peer through the uncurtained glass walls of the office. From the hall or the office, you could only see a few inches of missing tile, and we were high up, where people didn't normally look. The light wasn't as bad as I thought it might be. Exit signs gleamed at corridor junctions, illuminating the way to various wings of the campuses. Occasionally, the gleam from the headlights of cars pulling into the circular drive swept across the blinds of the windows at the far end of the office. We had a perfect spot with only one major drawback. To remain in our perch, we had straddled dividers between the johns. This became excessively uncomfortable since we tried to move as little as possible. An hour and a half later, each movement of muscle became near agony. We were in good shape, but the tension on one set of muscles for a prolonged period was hell. It didn't help that 15 minutes after we started, Scott began to get mutinous. By the time the hour and a half was up, I would have cheerfully made him walk the plank and spread shark food on the waters to make sure he'd be the main course for dinner. When he hit the water, he'd begun another, "I told you this was a waste of time," crack when I thought I heard something. The custodial noises had long since dimmed to nothingness. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He'd been grousing in a whisper and fell silent immediately. I waited a minute without hearing a repetition. I was almost ready to whisper to Scott when the noise came again, definitely the sound of somebody easing down the corridor and trying to remain silent. In the darkness, I couldn't see which direction this someone was coming from, and my range of vision was limited. I listened with remembered jungle instincts, then pointed to the right. A dark mass crept slowly along next to the wall. Its path would take it directly beneath us. We couldn't risk moving. A Gay Mysteries Audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.